Most people spend their entire lives trying to become better, but very few ever stop to ask a far more dangerous question. What if everything you believe about growth is holding you back? What if discipline isn't about forcing yourself, but freeing yourself? What if success isn't about adding more, but stripping everything unnecessary away? There was one man who didn't just train harder than everyone else. He thought differently. While the world chased rigid systems, he rejected limits. While others copied, he created. While others feared failure, he used it as fuel. This is not just motivation. This is a complete shift in how you see yourself, your limits, and your potential. Because the mindset you're about to hear didn't just build strength, it built something far more powerful, a person who could not be confined by anyone else's rules. And once you understand it, you won't think the same way again. Eliminate limitations, mentally and physically, begins with a brutal kind of honesty that most people avoid. It demands that you question every boundary you've accepted without proof. From childhood, you are handed invisible rules: how far you can go, what you're capable of, what's realistic, what's not. These rules don't come from your true potential. They come from other people's fears, failures, and narrow experiences. Over time, you start to mistake these borrowed beliefs for facts. You shrink your actions to fit inside them. You stop testing your edges. You begin living in a mental cage that feels normal because you've never stepped outside it. To eliminate limitations, you must first see them clearly. Not the obvious physical limits like fatigue or lack of skill, but the silent thoughts that whisper, "This is enough," or "This is too hard." These thoughts feel like truth, but they are often just habits. Every time you choose comfort over challenge, you reinforce them. Every time you hesitate before taking a risk, you strengthen the walls around you. Breaking this cycle requires awareness, catching yourself in the moment when doubt appears and refusing to treat it as authority. Mental limitations are powerful because they shape physical reality. If you believe you can't push further, your body will obey. If you believe something is impossible, you won't even attempt it. But belief is not fixed. It can be trained, just like the body. When you repeatedly expose yourself to discomfort, your mind starts to recalibrate what it considers possible. What once felt extreme becomes normal. What once seemed unreachable becomes expected. This is how boundaries shift, not through sudden breakthroughs but through consistent confrontation with what you once avoided. Physical limitations, on the other hand, are more visible but equally deceptive. The body signals pain, fatigue, resistance, and most people interpret these signals as stop signs. But often, they are just thresholds, not final limits. There is a difference between injury and discomfort, between danger and effort. Learning to distinguish them is essential. When you train your body with intention, you realize it is capable of far more than your initial reactions suggest. Strength is not just built in muscles. It is built in your relationship with effort, pain, and persistence. Eliminating physical limits doesn't mean ignoring your body. It means understanding it deeply. It means pushing when growth demands it and recovering when necessary, without using rest as an excuse to avoid difficulty. It means refining your discipline until your actions are no longer controlled by mood or convenience. Most people wait to feel ready before they act. But readiness is often a myth. Action creates readiness, not the other way around. There is also a deeper layer of limitation: identity. You start to define yourself based on past results. You say, "I'm not the type of person who can do that," or "This is just who I am." These statements feel harmless, but they lock you into a fixed version of yourself. When you attach your identity to limitations, you defend them without realizing it. You avoid situations that challenge them. You protect your comfort zone because it reinforces who you think you are. To eliminate limitations, you must detach from this fixed identity. You must see yourself as something constantly evolving, not something already defined. This requires letting go of the need to be right about yourself. It requires being willing to fail publicly, to struggle, to look inexperienced. Growth demands that you step into spaces where you are not in control, where your current abilities are not enough. Most people avoid these situations because they threaten their sense of competence, but these are the exact environments where limitations are exposed and broken. Another critical aspect is environment. The people around you, the content you consume, the standards you accept, all of these either reinforce your limitations or challenge them. If you surround yourself with individuals who settle, who justify mediocrity, who avoid discomfort, you will unconsciously adopt the same patterns. On the other hand, when you place yourself among those who demand more from themselves, who push beyond what seems reasonable, your perspective shifts. What once felt extreme becomes expected. Your limits expand because your reference point changes. Eliminating limitations also requires clarity of purpose. Without a strong reason to push forward, your mind will always find excuses to stop. Purpose acts as fuel when motivation fades. It gives meaning to discomfort. It transforms effort from something you endure into something you choose. When you are clear about what you are working toward, resistance loses its power. You no longer ask, "Do I feel like doing this?" You ask, "Is this aligned with where I'm going?" That shift alone removes countless limitations. Consistency is where most people fail. They attempt to break their limits in bursts, intense effort followed by long periods of retreat. But limitations are not removed through occasional action. They are dissolved through repetition. Every day you act beyond your comfort zone, you weaken the old patterns. Every day you choose discipline over ease, you reinforce a new standard. Over time, what once required effort becomes automatic. This is how transformation becomes permanent. There is also the role of fear. Fear is often the final barrier before a limitation breaks. It signals that you are approaching something unfamiliar, something uncertain. Most people interpret fear as a warning to retreat, but in reality, it is often an indicator of growth. When you learn to move through fear instead of away from it, you unlock new levels of capability. You realize that fear does not control you unless you let it. Eliminating limitations is not a one-time event. It is a continuous process. Every level you reach will reveal new boundaries, new doubts, new challenges. The goal is not to become limitless in the sense of having no obstacles, but to develop a mindset that refuses to be confined by them. It is about becoming someone who constantly questions, tests, and expands their own potential. You stop waiting for permission. You stop measuring yourself against average standards. You stop accepting comfort as adapt, don't imitate. This principle challenges one of the most common traps people fall into when trying to grow. The natural instinct is to look at someone successful, study what they do, and copy it as closely as possible. It feels logical. If something works for them, it should work for you. But what most people fail to realize is that imitation often leads to limitation. When you copy someone else exactly, you inherit not only their strengths, but also the constraints of their personality, their circumstances, and their way of thinking. You begin to move like them, think like them, and eventually lose sight of what makes you unique. Adaptation starts where imitation ends. It requires awareness, not just of what works, but of why it works. Instead of blindly following a method, you break it down, understand its core principles, and reshape it to fit your own nature. This demands more effort than imitation because it forces you to think independently. It forces you to question, experiment, and sometimes fail. But this process is what creates originality. It is what allows you to evolve rather than repeat. Imitation is comfortable because it removes responsibility. When you follow a fixed path, you don't have to make difficult decisions. You simply execute. But this also means that when things don't work, you have no foundation to adjust. You become dependent on external guidance. Adaptation, on the other hand, places responsibility entirely on you. You must observe results, identify what needs to change, and refine your approach continuously. This builds not only skill but awareness, the ability to read situations, understand variables, and respond effectively. One of the key elements of adaptation is flexibility. Rigid thinking is one of the greatest barriers to growth. When you become attached to a single method or belief, you stop seeing alternatives. You ignore opportunities that don't fit your existing framework. You resist change even when it is necessary. Adaptation requires the opposite mindset. It demands that you remain open, that you treat every method as temporary, every strategy as adjustable. You are not loyal to a system. You are loyal to progress. This doesn't mean abandoning structure entirely. It means using structure as a tool, not as a cage. You take what is useful and discard what is not. You modify techniques based on your strengths and weaknesses. You recognize that what works today may not work tomorrow, and you are prepared to evolve. This constant refinement keeps you moving forward while others remain stuck, repeating the same actions and expecting different results. Another important aspect is self-awareness. Without it, adaptation becomes random. You need to understand your own tendencies, how you react under pressure, what motivates you, where you struggle. This knowledge allows you to tailor your approach in a way that maximizes your effectiveness. For example, two people may follow the same training routine, but one may thrive while the other burns out. The difference lies not in the method itself, but in how well it aligns with the individual. Adaptation bridges this gap. There is also the element of creativity. When you stop imitating, you create space for innovation. You begin to combine ideas from different sources, experiment with new approaches, and discover solutions that didn't exist before. This is where true progress happens. Imitation can only take you as far as the person you are copying. Adaptation allows you to go beyond that. It turns you from a follower into a creator. Fear often plays a role in why people choose imitation over adaptation. Creating your own path involves uncertainty. There is no guarantee of success. There is no clear roadmap. This can be uncomfortable, especially when compared to the apparent safety of following someone else's blueprint. But this safety is often an illusion. What works for someone else may fail for you, and when it does, you are left without direction. Adaptation teaches you to navigate uncertainty with confidence. It builds resilience because you learn to adjust rather than collapse. Environment also influences this process. In spaces where conformity is rewarded, imitation becomes the norm. People are encouraged to fit into predefined roles, to follow established patterns. Breaking away from this can feel risky. It may invite criticism or doubt. But adaptation requires the courage to stand apart. It requires the willingness to be misunderstood while you develop your own approach. Over time, results speak louder than conformity. Adaptation is also closely tied to timing. Situations change. What was effective in one context may become ineffective in another. Those who rely on imitation struggle to keep up because they are anchored to outdated methods. Those who adapt remain relevant because they adjust in real time. They observe shifts, recognize patterns, and respond accordingly. This ability to evolve with changing circumstances is what separates sustained success from temporary achievement. Another layer of this principle is learning. When you imitate, learning is superficial. You focus on replicating actions without fully understanding them. When you adapt, learning becomes deep. You analyze outcomes, identify patterns, and extract insights. This creates a feedback loop where every experience contributes to your growth. Success reinforces effective strategies while failure highlights areas for improvement. Both become valuable. There is also a balance to maintain. Complete rejection of external influence is not adaptation, it is isolation. The goal is not to ignore others, but to learn from them intelligently. You observe, you absorb, but you do not copy blindly. You filter everything through your own perspective. You test ideas, keep what works, and refine it. This balance allows you to benefit from existing knowledge while still developing your own identity. Adaptation requires patience. It is not an instant process. It involves trial and error, adjustments, and continuous effort. There will be moments where imitation seems easier, where creating your own way feels slow and uncertain. But over time, the benefits compound. You develop a system that is uniquely yours, one that evolves as you do. Turn struggle into self-mastery. This idea goes far beyond simply enduring hardship. Most people experience struggle as something negative, something to avoid, something that signals they are off track. But the truth is, struggle is not the enemy. It is the raw material of transformation. The difference lies in how you interpret it. If you see struggle as resistance, you will fight against it, complain about it, and try to escape it. If you see it as a tool, you will lean into it, study it, and use it to refine yourself. Every challenge exposes something within you. It reveals your habits, your weaknesses, your emotional triggers, your level of discipline. When things are easy, these aspects remain hidden. Comfort masks flaws. But struggle strips everything down to the core. It forces you to confront what you're avoiding. It shows you exactly where you lack control. This is why it is so valuable. It gives you clarity that no amount of theory or planning can provide. Self-mastery begins with awareness. When you are in the middle of difficulty, your natural reactions surface. You may feel frustration, doubt, fear, or the urge to quit. Most people act on these emotions immediately. They let them dictate their behavior. But if you pause and observe instead, something shifts. You begin to separate yourself from the reaction. You realize that emotions are temporary, that they rise and fall, and that you do not have to obey them. This is the first step toward control. Control does not mean suppressing emotions. It means understanding them. When frustration appears, you ask why. When fear surfaces, you examine its source. This process turns emotional chaos into information. Instead of being overwhelmed, you become curious. You start to see patterns, situations that trigger certain responses, thoughts that lead to certain behaviors. Once you recognize these patterns, you can begin to change them. Struggle also tests discipline. It is easy to stay consistent when conditions are ideal. But true discipline is revealed when everything feels difficult. When you are tired, when progress is slow, when results are not visible. These are the moments that define your level of control. If you continue to act with intention despite discomfort, you strengthen your ability to rely on yourself. You prove that your actions are not dependent on mood or circumstance. There is also a physical dimension to this. When your body is pushed beyond its comfort zone, it adapts. Muscles grow. Endurance increases. Resilience builds. But this adaptation only happens when you stress the system. Without challenge, there is no growth. The same principle applies mentally. When you engage with difficult tasks, when you push through confusion and resistance, your capacity expands. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable. What once seemed impossible becomes routine. Another important aspect is patience. Struggle often comes with delayed results. You may put in effort without seeing immediate progress. This can be discouraging. It can create doubt. But self-mastery requires the ability to persist without constant reward. It requires trust in the process. You understand that growth is happening beneath the surface, even when it is not visible. You continue because you know that consistency compounds over time. Failure plays a critical role here. It is one of the most direct forms of struggle. Most people fear it because it challenges their self-image. It exposes gaps between who they are and who they want to be. But failure is also one of the most precise teachers. It shows you exactly what does not work. It forces you to adjust. When you remove the emotional weight from failure and treat it as feedback, it becomes a powerful tool. You stop avoiding it and start using it. There is also the concept of resistance. Whenever you try to grow, you will encounter internal pushback. This can appear as procrastination, distraction, or self-doubt. It is your mind's way of maintaining the familiar. Breaking through this resistance is a key part of self-mastery. It requires awareness and action. You recognize the pattern and choose not to follow it. You act despite the resistance, not because it disappears, but because you no longer let it control you. Environment influences how you experience struggle. If you are surrounded by people who avoid difficulty, who complain rather than act, it becomes easier to adopt the same mindset. Struggle feels heavier because it is reinforced by negativity. On the other hand, when you are in an environment that values growth, struggle is seen differently. It becomes a shared experience, something to learn from rather than something to escape. This shift in perspective can make a significant difference. Another layer is identity. If you see yourself as someone who avoids pain, you will resist struggle. If you see yourself as someone who grows through challenge, your response changes. Identity shapes behavior. When you align your identity with growth, struggle becomes part of who you are, not something separate from you. You begin to expect it, to accept it, and to use it. There is also a level of focus required. During difficult moments, it is easy to become overwhelmed by the big picture. The mind jumps ahead, imagining how much more effort is needed, how far there is to go. This creates anxiety and drains energy. Self-mastery involves narrowing your focus. You bring your attention back to the present task, the next action, the immediate step. This reduces overwhelm and allows you to move forward consistently. Struggle also builds resilience. Each time you face difficulty and continue, you strengthen your ability to handle future challenges. What once felt intense becomes manageable. Your tolerance increases, your confidence grows, not because things become easier, but because you become stronger. This resilience carries over into every area of your life. There is a transformation